This video is very ad hoc and I don't have a decent camera here. So excuse the graininess and all that, but I think it may be kind of important in terms of content. And I know that because some of you have contacted me after yesterday's YouTube video. So forget the camera, the quality or whatever. It's the issue that matters. Just so you know, it has to do with that part of Mark 3 that talks about the unforgivable sin. Some people are really traumatized by that. I would say by bad interpretation, not by Mark, but that's what this video is about. So if that's not an issue for you, you might as well skip it. So if you know me, you know that I'm not the counseling type. It's not that I don't have empathy. I do, a lot actually. It's just that I'm not very good at helping people feel at ease. And so nobody comes to me, for counseling, and that's fine. But counseling is a very important thing, and I'm very grateful for those of you who specialize in that area and who do amazing things. I'm not an expert on any of those things. I just dabble a little bit in it. Now, there is an area, though, where I do have something to contribute, and I feel that I should. Okay, so let me explain. When I did the video yesterday about Mark 3, and Jesus's family saying he's out of his mind, and then Jesus's opponent saying he's got an impure spirit and he's doing all this in the power of the devil and all that. Somebody, actually a number of people, contacted me with something that I'd seen before. I'd seen this during my more traditional career as a professor, seen it many times. I've spent many, many hours in coffee shops talking with people about this. Because people get traumatized by certain mistreatments of biblical texts. So what I have in mind here is simply this reference in Mark 3 to the unforgivable sin, where Jesus says any sin will be forgiven. Any kind of, utterance of blasphemy will be forgiven, but not this one, the one against the Holy Spirit. So I don't know how many students I've had in life, maybe 20,000. Of those 20,000, there must have been maybe, I would say about 50 over the years who would come to me and say they're really worried about this. And I mean, they say they're worried, and I can tell by conversation with them that really they're more than worried. They're traumatized. I'm taking this very, very seriously, because if somebody, for whatever reason, ends up traumatized in terms of their future, in terms of their afterlife, or in terms of their thoughts about their afterlife, and there's a lot of bad interpretation that causes people trauma because it is bad interpretation. Okay, so this is a case in point right here in Mark 3. So people read this, every sin can be forgiven, every blasphemy, but not this one. Now, because we individualize the heck out of everything, and we don't really care so much what people at the time were expected to interpret, or how they were expected to interpret Jesus's words, because of that, we immediately run into trouble here, because then people think, ooh, I think I've done that. I used to have faith in Jesus, and then I walked away, and I even had really sort of, blasphemous things to say about Jesus, and now that will not be forgiven, and I'll be in trouble forevermore. No, you will not be. You will not be. I'm saying this not because I'm the arbiter of that. I'm saying this because that particular trauma is based on really bad interpretation of this text. And that is not your fault. It may not even be the fault primarily of the ones who taught you this, whether, in your family, in your household, in your Bible study, at church on Sunday mornings or whatever. Though I have to say, if somebody stands at the front and claims to be an authoritative teacher of truth, they do have responsibility, and they should get their ducks in a row, and they often don't. That is very hard for me to accept. The combination of claiming teaching authority and yet being quite incompetent in many ways, that is not good. When I go to the doctor because I have a problem And it later turns out that the doctor kind of sort of butchered this medical whatever symptom I had because the doctor was not well qualified, or the attitude wasn't right, or the doctor was a little bit, oh, yeah, I think I'll do this or I'll do that. The doctor doesn't put in the homework, the research, the doctor wasn't taught well, or whatever. Whatever the case may be, I don't think that doctor should be practicing. And yet, there are pastors everywhere who are teaching supposedly with authority, and yet they're perpetuating stuff like what I just said. You know, where you take a text like Mark 3 and you make it about your individual future, your salvation. Never mind that nobody in the first century would have thought like that. Nobody. It's a different culture. They were not like us. They were not as self-obsessed as we are. They were not as narcissistic, individualistic. They were communal, which we are typically not, at least not anymore. Long story short, that kind of interpretation that traumatized you doesn't have a leg to stand on in terms of what the text is actually doing. It's really about the doing. That's the main thing. Meaning is about what a text does, not what the words in themselves mean. So if somebody says, I do, in the context of the wedding, they're doing something. They're not just informing, they're doing something. They're creating a reality. And when we mistreat the biblical text, we make it do something, and people are actually traumatized as a result. Of course, we do that in the positive way as well, or, well, intended to be positive. Whether it's really positive is another matter. You know, we go to John 3:16 and we think it's about me, and it makes me feel ever so good, and so on. Now that's just as bad, because John 3:16 is not about me, and it's not about you. It's actually about something more interesting than that, and something a little higher up the food chain than you and me. Okay, but my point is, we have this habit of individualizing the heck out of everything, and if we like it, then we feel spiritually empowered, and if we hate it, we end up traumatized. In extreme cases, like with this text here in Mark 3. Anyway, my point here is not to apportion blame so much, but I do think people who claim to be teaching truth need to take responsibility, and that includes pastors, professors, scholars, and so on. But my main point is to say this particular text need not worry you about this particular issue. Why? Because Mark 3 is not about individuals and their personal future. Mark 3 is about two competing kinds of humanity. One is based on this holiness understanding that is ritual times, ritual places, ritual functions, ritual offices, ritual channels of authority, lines of accountability. It's like it's like corporate America at prayer, if you will, plus ritual thrown in for good measure. That is one kind of humanity, and the other kind is the one that Jesus represents, and that is the one that is relational, where the other is as important as self. Self is important too, yes, but the other is as important, where Jesus even goes as far as to argue, and to die for it, to argue for a sacrificial understanding of relationality. That's how seriously he takes it, where he dismantles all the ritual stuff, all of it. There's nothing left. And by the way, if you're going to say, but what about the communion meal? Well, guess what? It was an actual meal. In those days, it was an actual meal with relationships and everything. Have you ever noticed in places like, Luke 22, where it talks about that Last Supper that Jesus had with the disciples? Before the text talks about the wine, it says, and then after the meal, that's when he did what he did with the wine. All that is to say, in early Christianity, those were actual real meals. So please don't think that Jesus kept this remnant of ritual holiness somehow going in the sense of the Eucharist. They didn't do Eucharist, they had an actual meal together. But my point is, in this text, in Mark 3, there's a very clear differentiation between two competing visions of humanity, of being human, one of which is top down, it's ritualistic, it's based on a center, it's highly centralized, it claims to have authority at the center. If you're not at the center, you don't have authority. You do as you're told, including showing up at the center. What is the center? Well, it's the temple. It's the temple. The temple that Jesus says throughout the gospel, especially towards the end, it's doomed. It's doomed. And good riddance. So there's a competition, in a sense, in Mark 3 and in many other places throughout Mark between that understanding of humanity, that kind of spiritualizing managed humanity, that top-down managed humanity, that is so prevalent in Christian circles, that is the norm in Christian circles, between that and, on the other hand, a grounded, earthy, loving, sacrificial, real life where people actually live kind of humanity that is relationally a model for the world at large. When they are accusing Jesus of having an impure spirit, that of course goes hand in hand, because they also said he was doing this in the power of the devil just a few lines earlier. And you know how I said in the other video that Jesus kind of turns that round and says, hey, by the way, the Lord of the house, not a good thing in Mark 3, the Lord of the house needs to be tied up so that the house can be plundered. Now that, I told you in the other video, that is a clear challenge to the temple. And the Lord of the temple, of course, is the high priest. And sure enough, in chapter 14, it blows up in the manner that you expect if you are a good reader of Mark's gospel. If you're not a good reader, or if the gospel's been chopped up by some lectionary into a million bits and nothing fits together anymore, you know, like mixing different puzzles and then trying to create a new one. If that's what you're doing, then it doesn't matter if you're a good reader or not. Then basically, you know, that horse is bolted. So anyway, there is this competing vision between the temple type, managed humanity type Christianity, or at the time of Jesus, Judaism, and this sacrificial, relational, decentralized thing on the other hand. It's no surprise, by the way, that when you look at the New Testament, especially Acts, the continuation of the Gospels, that those who are in favor of the managed humanity, which is the apostles, they have practically nothing to contribute anymore in Acts. I kid you not, I'm not making this up. Go to Acts. If you think I'm wrong, get in touch with me and tell me what I'm missing. I'm telling you this much. In the first quarter of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, they are still around, sort of, on their home turf, and they get some stuff done. But guess what? They aren't supposed to be on their home turf anymore. They're supposed to be out there, decentralization out there, but they say no thank you. So they hang out in Jerusalem, and the story moves on without them. And instead, the main actors in Acts are what I call the minor characters, which is why somebody produced lots of T-shirts that are in circulation, because I kept using that phrase, minor characters. So there are some T-shirts made by American Apparel that have minor characters, TM, which are my initials, but it so happens it's also trademarked, so that's perfect. Do you see what I'm saying? There are two competing humanities, and that is what that is about, you know, that point that Jesus makes with respect to the unforgivable sin. This is not about you having to worry about, can you return to faith after you walked away from faith and said nasty things about God or whatever. This is not about that. This is about saying, if you buy into the wrong kind of humanity, you do not get to participate in this restoration project, this project humanity in this world that Israel was supposed to be all about and that the church is supposed to be about. That's what it means. So let me use a very trivial little illustration. You're on the plane and the plane takes off, and there's an announcement that basically says, you're doomed, we're doomed, this plane is going to go down and we're doomed. Okay, that would be bad news, and that would be very traumatizing, and some of you are traumatized. Now, compare that to another situation where you're at the gate and there's a flight going to, I don't know, Cancun, Mexico, and the other one's going to Moscow. And you want to swim in the Caribbean, and you have your swimsuit and your scuba diving gear and all kinds of fun stuff, fun in the sun, and so on. And now, if somebody says to you, if you get on that plane to Moscow, you will not be swimming in the Caribbean. You get on that plane, or maybe you're already on that plane, and you realize, whoa, I'm going to Moscow, but I want to go swimming in the Caribbean. Do you see what I mean? It's a super trivial example, but the point is, these are options in terms of consequences in this life. This idea that this is about the future of an individual, no, that's not what it is. This is about essentially lifestyle choices. So spiritual lifestyle choices of serious consequence, yes, absolutely, but they're still rooted in this life. So we're not in a situation where Jesus says, hey, you're on this plane and you're going to crash. In other words, you'll spend eternity in hell or something like that. It's not what he is saying. What he is saying is, if you want one kind of humanity, if you want to participate in this fun-filled beach vacation, you shouldn't be getting on that plane. Okay? So, again, trivial imagery here. But that is the idea. So people have to decide at this point, what kind of humanity do I want? Which plane am I going to get on? The temple one with Jesus' opponents, or the one that he decentralizes and they meet in the houses and that does away with the ritual and all the rest of it. That's it. And by the way, this theme will be with us throughout Mark, and I'm going to give a few more examples in a few more videos, and you will see how the whole thing comes together. So please, if you have been traumatized by this unforgivable sin situation, relax, make a coffee, think about this. Get in touch with me if you want me to say more about it. See you then.